Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be sharing with you how to get started canning if you are a brand new beginner, if you are canning curious, if maybe you aren't sure about canning just yet but you want to learn more. I'm going to be showing with you how to get started with canning using the Canning Essentials workbook that I will have linked below. It's a workbook that I've created that's 12 pages long, and it is super valuable with both pages that you can write in and visual guides that you can have both either printed out or just like looking at on your phone or on your desktop that will help you get started canning. A super easy visually guided way. And so let's get started. I'm Jenny and I blog at thedomesticwildflower.com, and I've been sharing canning and homemade DIY homemade food and craft there for over 2 years, and it kind of occurred to me that while I've been sharing recipes and courses about canning, that maybe something that you guys would think would be really valuable would be not a full-length course necessarily, but something that's like a low investment, low risk workbook that you could grab for an affordable price point, that you could kind of just get your feet wet and test out canning and see if it's right for you. So that's the backstory behind creating this Canning Essentials workbook. I think that you'll find that it's just a really great, valuable resource that you can refer to get started with canning and not feel like you're diving into something without really being positive that you want to try it yet. I want to show you in this video exactly what's inside the Canning Essentials workbook, so let's dive in. The Canning Essentials workbook helps you to plan, prepare, and preserve. You'll see that the first page is the water bath equipment checklist, and it gives you every item that you would need to get started with water bath canning. So with any new hobby or activity you start, there's some equipment involved, and I know that it's a real bummer that you get started. Like, I know I'm guilty of like thinking that I want to become a soap maker, and now I have like a box of soap making supplies in my closet, and I haven't made soap like in a couple years. I don't want you to get started with canning and think that it's a ton of equipment that you have to go out and buy. So this list will share with you that most of these items you already have or can get for really inexpensively. There's a couple items that you have to have that you probably don't already have, and I'll tell you right now that that one item is the jar lifter. You probably don't have a jar lifter and you have to have one, and I would suggest that you grab one from Amazon or from a grocery store. That's really like the one item that you probably do not already own that you definitely need to have. The second page is the steam canner fact sheet and equipment checklist. Many of you may not have ever heard of steam canning. Steam canning is the modern, new way of canning that is faster and more efficient, and it is the most recently approved way of canning the same water bath canning recipes that your grandma and your mom have been using for years and years. It uses the same principles of heat to preserve food in jars. It's just doing it in a much faster way. So it's using a steam canner pot. So you'll see that the first item on the bottom half of the page is a steam canner. Those are about 40 bucks on Amazon. But if I were you and you are interested in canning and you're like not sure which one to try and you don't have any strong feeling one way or the other, I would get started with steam canning because there's fewer items that you have to buy overall, and it's just way faster. It's so awesome. If you're a person who already knows how to water bath can, or you're like kind of familiar with it, don't feel like you're missing the boat. It's still like canning is still awesome, the traditional method, and I have lots of tips and tricks for making traditional water bath canning faster. But just steam canning is just a really fun way to speed up the process. And you can actually, once you get good at traditional canning, you can add steam canning in too and do both on the same stovetop. So there's lots of fun ways to incorporate one or both methods into your canning experience. But that's the second sheet in the Canning Essentials Workbook. The next couple pages are the canning season planner and checklist. This is to help you plan out, like, big picture wise what's going to happen in the canning season. So this is where you would sit down and think out, okay, so in the spring, in the grocery store or in the farmer's market, I know I see strawberries and I see those beautiful little pearl onions. I want to try and make some strawberry jam, and I want to try and pickle some pearl onions. So maybe you would jot those things down in this rectangle here. And then in the summer, you might think, I definitely want to try and make tomato sauce. Tomatoes are ripe in the summertime, you'd write down tomato sauce. In the fall, your goal maybe will be to make applesauce. You know, if apples are ripe in the fall, you want to write down applesauce. In the wintertime, citrus is a big thing that people can in the wintertime, so you'd write down citrus. So whatever your taste or your family preferences are for this season, this is where you would write down what you hope to plan out to can. Of course, these things change, but if you think ahead about what you love to eat or what you would like to can in advance, maybe to share during the holidays, this is a really, really good one. I know during the summertime, we can get cherries where I live for much less expensive than in the wintertime, right? And I plan to can many small jars of chocolate cherry jam in the summertime and then save them and give them during the holidays as gifts. So if I plan out my canning season, I plan it ahead, and I'll know, like, oh yeah, I definitely want to get some cherries to do that. That's where I would write this down. It also reminds you of the jars you might need to grab at the grocery store. You always need new lids. It might remind you to grab a jar lifter, a funnel, make sure you have the appropriate pots and pans. On the bottom right, there's the dry goods list that you would want to refer to. Make sure that you have those items in your pantry shelves. On the right, the second sheet inside the Canning Essentials Workbook is the Canning Season Cheat Sheet. This is a way to visualize where to put which pot. So I just did this because I think lots of beginners aren't sure, like, what's going on where, what's happening when, like, what's going on the stove, because it does seem like it's a lot going on, right? And there's no shame in feeling like that. It can seem like that, especially when you read a really long, like, paragraph after paragraph in a canning book. Those directions can seem super overwhelming. So I just made this visual guide to help you see, okay, so the preserving pan's in the front. That's where you're making your jam. In the back, you have the processing pot, and that is where you have the boiling water. That's what that's to indicate for you. Then I have a visual guide for adjusting for elevation. And then on the right, this is probably the most valuable sheet inside the Canning Essentials Workbook. And it's funny too, because when you're a beginning canner, you don't know about acid and the role in canning, and it's okay if you never really understand it. But I'll tell you a little bit about canning and acid now. Canning is a science. Okay, it's not a mystery. We understand lots about, we understand how canning works. And one of the ways that canning works is that we water bath can foods that have a high acid value. The magic number that food scientists have set is 4.6, okay? So we can foods in a water bath process or in a steam canner that are a 4.6 or more acid, or which is a smaller number. I know that's a little confusing, but 4.6 or smaller number are a strong acid. So I made this chart to show you the foods that naturally occur, just like God made them that way. Mother Nature made these foods naturally acidic, so that you know, okay, so lemons are about a 2.2. geez, cranberries are a 2.3 to 2.5. They're pretty darn close. So they're interchangeable to some extent, right? You might think that lemons are citrus and tangerines are citrus, but if you look at their acid value, lemons are a 2.2 to 2.4 and a tangerine's a 4. That's a fairly significant difference, right? I wanted to show you this in a chart form to show you that not all veggies or all fruits have the same acid value, right? So you absolutely should follow a trusted canning recipe when you're canning, but in the instance that you wanted to make a substitution or that you were considering making a substitution, the principles of acid should be guiding you pretty closely. And let's use this tangerine and lemon example. You might think, well, they're both citrus. They're the same. I should be able to swap those out, 1 tablespoon for 1 tablespoon. And I would say, without any further research, I would say no, because a tangerine only is a 4 and a lemon is a 2.2 to 2.4. That's a significant enough difference that, knowing nothing else about this recipe, this hypothetical substitution that a canner might be making, I would say, no, you better not. You should probably find a different recipe that has the ingredients that you have on hand. So again, when you're getting started canning, it's okay if you're like, oh, that sounds really confusing. I don't know anything about acid. That's totally fine. You can just use a trusted canning recipe. But as you learn a little bit more about canning, you'll understand that canning works because the food inside is acidic, okay? It creates, inside the jar, canning creates an environment kind of like the surface of Mars. It's inhospitable for germs to grow. It's high in acid. The boiling water makes it really high in temperature, so it kills all the germs. The heat also forces all the oxygen out of the jar, so there's no oxygen. So it's inhospitable for spoilers to grow. So you can't really be going around thinking like, I don't really like lemons, but I do like the flavor of carrots. I'm going to swap in some carrot juice instead. And if you look way down toward the middle bottom third here, carrots are a 4.9 to 6.4. They are on the alkaline side of the scale. Absolutely not. You cannot swap those things out in a canning recipe. Okay? Canning's not like regular cooking where you get to think like, I like this flavor instead. I'm just going to swap it out and see what happens. It's a science, and you have to abide by the trusted canning recipe or proceed with some knowledge of the acid scale like this. So hopefully that makes sense, and it also should draw your attention to the approximate levels here in the 4.66 zone, specifically the tomatoes. So tomatoes just naturally, just because, for a variety of reasons, they come off the vine with kind of a high range, okay? Some tomatoes are a 3.5 and some are as alkaline as 4.9. It used to be, 50 to 100 years ago that they were naturally much more acidic, and because they've been hybridized to do a variety of things like be more red and more round and more beautiful and sit on the shelf for longer and travel a long distance in semi-trucks, they're not as acid as they once were. So tomatoes in particular have a reputation for being a high acid food when actually they're not so much anymore. So that's why I have this like light green bar in the middle that shows you the foods that are in particular of interest. They're in that kind of, not danger zone, but those are the foods in particular that you need to pay close attention to and follow a trusted canning recipe in particular. So hopefully that makes sense. There's a lot of information on that page, and it can just be just that. It can just be information. And information is power, and the more information you know, the more empowered you'll feel. And that's exactly what I want you to feel when you look at that page, is empowered. And now we have the wildflower canning log. Okay, so you might think like, why am I going to log what I'm canning? Okay, so what you would log is you would write down the canning recipe that you tried, where the recipe came from, whether it was from the Domestic Wildflower blog or if you found it in like the Ball Book of Canning Recipes or whatever, which ingredients it called for, the yield, like the number of jars that recipe yielded for you, and then notes, like if that pickle recipe was really way too spicy for your kids, or if you absolutely loved this version of salsa and you definitely want to make it again next year, or if this was a ton of work and it took way longer than you expected, you need to definitely plan for 2 hours extra next time. Because the thing is about canning is that it is a seasonal activity, and the next time you can that particular recipe or that type of vegetable or fruit, it's a whole year later, and you may not remember, and you probably won't remember. Now, did I use this recipe or the other recipe to make those really good pickles that I like so much? Or how did I make that really good tomato sauce? Having a canning log is super, super valuable, and it just makes it like so much more enjoyable the next time around. And there's an extra sheet, and then I have a couple bonus recipes at the end of the Canning Essentials workbook to share with you, including a recipe for homemade tomato jam and strawberry jam. So I hope that you guys found that really valuable, and I hope that if you are someone who's interested in learning about canning and you just haven't been quite sure about how to get started, that you will grab the Canning Essentials workbook. Right now it's just $5. It's a low investment, low price point. Just grab it and you can print it and you can see it on your phone or look at it on your desktop and use it while you're in the grocery store, at the farmer's market, and use it to help you get started with what I think is such a time-saving, satisfying, super fun thing that can help you improve your meal times by miles. So hopefully I will see you grab the Canning Essentials workbook and see you soon.